this movement, whatever the movement is always bigger than you. It's a community effort to help somebody else.
It's human nature for us to take care of each other.
People are standing up and saying, I want to do my part in some small way.
Move on makes things happen. And that's what we need. A way to get involved, a way to stay involved.
It's like a ripple effect.
Neighbors and communities talking about things that matter and then ensuring that those voices and those interests are heard in a meaningful way is how we are able to make an impact.
Anybody can learn how to do this. I went from being immobilized to being a thriving organizer and mobilizer with Move On's help.
And welcome to day 3 of the Progressive Power Summit. Hello, Move On. Good afternoon if you're on the East. Good morning everywhere else. We've got a lot of fun sessions today. Want to shout out a couple of folks that are in the chat. Dave Gutman in Los Angeles County, Val Hosky, Rachel Singh, who was here yesterday, Rayad Muhammad is there, Kenya Leon, Katrine Abinoff, Kimberly Kellogg. Lots of folks are joining today. We've got a lot of fun stuff that's coming up. Want to go ahead and remind folks that at any time today, there's a virtual photo booth. So if you look across the top of your panel, you'll see the virtual photo booth. Here's a shot that I took. It's really cool, really fun to do. As well as there's a survey. If you go to moveon.org/swag, you can get a swag kit. You can also fill out a survey about your opinions for the summit. And without further ado, I'm not even gonna tee up this session. I'm just gonna pass it over to Mary Drummer. I don't think Mary's live. Is Mary live?
It's still on you, Darrell. Now it's on. Oh.
Okay. Hi. There we go. Hi, everyone. I am Mary Drummer. I'm a reproductive rights organizer and a board member of Women Have Options. It's the State Abortion Fund of Ohio. And I am joined here today by Lori Bertram Roberts, who is the founder of the Mississippi Reproductive Freedom Fund and the current executive director of the Yellow Hammer Fund, the abortion fund for Alabama. And we are also joined by Sonja Spoo, who is the director of reproductive rights campaigns for UltraViolet. Thank you all so much for joining us for Attacks on Reproductive Justice from Texas to Roe v. Wade. So we are going to start off with a panel discussion for about 25, 30 or so minutes, and then we're going to open it up for the rest of the session to audience questions as well. So first things first, I know so many people participated in one of the over 650 marches yesterday for abortion rights and abortion justice all over the country in all 50 states and also our nation's capital. Sonja was there in DC for the march. And Sonja, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was, really exciting, I think, to be gathered together safely with COVID precautions. Everyone was wearing masks. We distanced on the march as much as we possibly could. Just, I think, as a kickoff to what will be a very long season of activity, both, leading up to Jackson on December 1st before the Supreme Court, but also as we begin to both do organizing to get pro-choice champions into office and also accountability to get those who do not stand with us out of office in the midterms, going forward to a Jackson decision in summer of next year, and then working with folks on the ground to figure out what comes next and what the vision for our rights are when it comes to abortion access, because Roe has always, always, always been the floor, right? And for millions of people across the country, even before SB 8 came into effect in Texas, or before the marches and all that, as Lori can talk to, like, it ain't been good, right? There's been abortion bans and restrictions that have put abortion out of access for young people, LGBTQ people, people of color, Indigenous people, for way too long. And so I see these marches, as a way for folks who are not in the day-to-day to begin to get engaged. March yesterday, donate today to an abortion fund, join your local abortion organization, whether it's working to help a clinic out or working to volunteer for a practical support fund or working to any of that stuff. There were next action steps that hopefully you got activated on at a march, because marching alone is not enough. It's not sufficient. So I was really proud to represent UltraViolet as a partner at the march in here in DC. I was thrilled that women of color were centered, because for too long we have not been centered in this movement, despite the impacts being most real for us in our communities. And it was a good first step for many people, I think, to realize that this is a very long road ahead of us, and we need everyone to be activated at all levels.
Thank you so much, Sonja. That is so true. And I also want to give, first and foremost, kind of like the briefest of overviews of like how we kind of got to this moment, because I can think how a lot of folks, again, are very new to this movement and may not realize this has been a long time coming to get here. And so I just want to give a little bit of context. I know a lot of folks also got activated, like in 2018 when we saw a wave of 6-week abortion bans happening across the South, including in Alabama, where Lori is in. But I want to give some context as well, too. So the attacks on abortion access this is all part of a very heavily coordinated and extremely well-funded, meticulously planned attack to strip away abortion rights that has been going on since Roe v. Wade was decided. In 1976, Illinois Congressman Henry Hyde introduced the Hyde Amendment, which bans the use of federal funding for abortion services. And this mainly affects the folks who are getting abortion care through Medicaid. So this disproportionately affects people who are low income, people of color, all those folks, and also people who already have children. So that happened. In 1992, in a case out of Pennsylvania called Planned Parenthood v. Casey, the Supreme Court did affirm Roe, but they also said that states could pass some restrictions on abortion as long as it didn't create an undue burden. There are a lot of issues that came out of that case. The biggest one is that they didn't specify what is an undue burden. So for the past 29 years, we have lawmakers playing this game of whack-a-mole, trying to pass anti-abortion legislation to restrict abortion access as much as possible, with the overall goal of it going to the Supreme Court. So right now, in 2016, there was a major case out of Texas, the whole women's health case. And then last year in 2020, there was another case that came out of Louisiana, the June v. Russo case. Both of those were struck down. But again, coming up, as Sonja had mentioned, on December 1st, the court is going to hear a case out of Mississippi, which is the Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization. So that's coming out, and that one is around a 15-week abortion ban. So, according to the Guttmacher Institute, since Roe v. Wade, over 1,000 abortion restrictions have been enacted, with over 400 of them coming just since 2010. The most extreme of this is the Texas SB 8 law that went into effect last month. And so what SB 8 does is it bans abortion at 6 weeks. And also, in addition to that, it allows anyone to sue a person or organization that provides abortion care or helps someone access abortion care in the state of Texas. And it rewards them with a bounty of up to $10,000. So it pretty much overnight, most abortions are banned in Texas, which left many clinics scrambling, a lot of patients scrambling and having to travel out of state last minute. It basically created chaos. So, and this is where we are today. And I'm going to kick it to Lori next. So, Lori, as someone who has 2 abortion funds, one in Mississippi, one in Alabama, can you tell us a bit about the current state of abortion access in the Deep South? And also, have you seen any of the effects of SB 8 in Mississippi or in Alabama?
Let me unmute. So I want to say thanks for having me, first of all. But the thing about SB 8 and stuff like that, and like all of this stuff has been coming, like you said, for a long time. Yeah, of course, we've seen a fallout from SB 8. The thing is that nothing happens in one state in a vacuum. Everything always spills over. So just like the last time when Texas clinics closed, and it wasn't all of Texas clinics that were impacted, it was just some Texas clinics. We saw that overflow of patients impact states all across the South, right? So when clinics when patients from Texas have to go into Louisiana, then that pushes people from Louisiana into Mississippi and Mississippians into Alabama, and even Texans will come all the way to Alabama. So then that impacts how much pressure you have on funds, how much pressure you have on the capacity of clinics, because Texas is a huge state. Texas is the size of a nation. I was talking to foreign press recently, and I was like, European press like really can't get their mind around how huge Texas is, or just the land mass that is the United States, like how far people drive to get abortion care. I mean, that's like taking a holiday for them. Like that's just, it's like obscenely long ways to drive. And the truth is that abortion care in the South has already been in a pre-Roe existence for decades already. We've already had abortion deserts in parts of the South, parts of Texas. The Rio Grande Valley has such hard access already. If you can't get to McAllen, forget about it. It's just so far to go. In Mississippi, we have one clinic. And if you don't live in one of the other parts of the state where you're close to a border that has a clinic close, like if you're not close to Memphis, if you're not close to Baton Rouge, if you're not close to where Tuscaloosa is, if you're not close to, New Orleans, you could have a 3 or 4 hour drive to wherever clinic you have to go to, whether it's Jackson, whether it's Memphis, whatever it is, right? So, and one of the things I want to emphasize is when we say 3 hours, that's 3 hours there. That's a 6-hour round trip drive. And you have to do it twice because of, 2-day waiting periods and all of the other stuff that's put in people's way. And so like, when I look at SB 8, I just see it as a kind of, people say they were surprised, and I was surprised. But when I think about it, when I sat back more, it's a natural progression of where the anti-choice movement has been going, because for years they have not only been chipping away at access to Roe, but they have been stigmatizing providing care, not only care, but services to abortion providers, such as just dropping off FedEx mail, just being a plumber for the clinic, being, just anything. So much so that it's hard for providers to get basic services like a roofer. And I can tell you that because Yellowhammer Fund owns a clinic. And let me tell you, it is hard to get people to work for you because they do not want to be harassed.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I used to be an organizer for the Texas Equal Access Fund, which is the abortion fund in Northern Texas. And even before all this happened, they already had agreements with clinics in Oklahoma and New Mexico, because already traveling out of state was a thing. Just because access was just so difficult to get. And it's getting a lot worse, like you mentioned too. So thank you for sharing that. I want to go over to Sonja real quick. So Sonja, for the past year, UltraViolet has been running a Repro Receipts campaign targeting corporate bad actors, mainly corporations who donate to anti-abortion politicians at the state and the federal level. Can you tell us more about that campaign and why you all chose to go that route of targeting the donors of these politicians?
Yeah, we, what we have done a lot successfully since our founding is really focus on corporate accountability when it comes to women's rights and, rights overall. And one of our successful campaigns actually happened in 2019 with the Georgia 6-week ban, which would have banned abortion after 6 weeks in Georgia. That's currently enjoined and going through a similar court, journey, so to speak. And one of the unique things that we wanted to intervene at is how do we get corporate power to use their economic power in the states to help at least slow down or exact a cost for lawmakers, passing this bill. And Georgia prides itself on its burgeoning Hollywood studio scene. They offer huge amounts of tax credits to studios and stuff. A lot of actors without relocate to Georgia. And so we also know, like, Hollywood, has spoken out about various, with trans bills in North Carolina, or, that there has been a power in corporations speaking out on issues, and that they had not spoken out on abortion before. So we targeted Netflix to ask them to speak out against this law, because we know that when Netflix moves in the industry, it's a trickle down, like every other studio then rushes to move. And so that was successful. We got Netflix to speak out, and that led to Disney, that led to Warner Media. It led to a trickle effect of other studios speaking out, which really spooked Brian Kemp and a lot of lawmakers that one of these marquee industries for their state were beginning to speak out against some of the laws that they were passing. But that kind of led us to think about this larger question of how businesses interact with the issue of reproductive rights, both internally. Do they cover abortion care? Do they make sure people have access to the full spectrum of reproductive health care that includes IVF, so on and so forth? And how can we think about ways to kind of undercut the anti-choice political movement in a way that's in addition to electoral organizing? And that's how we kind of came to this idea of these anti-choice, anti-abortion, anti-women, anti-justice politicians are funded in large part by corporations, especially at the state level. 46% of campaign contributions to state lawmakers. And remember, although people pay a lot of attention to what's happening in DC, the lion's share of issues, whether it's abortion access or trans justice issues or racial justice issues, the lion's share of bullshit is happening in the states. Right? Because Republicans made a plan to take over state governments, and they stuck to it, and they landed it because we took our eye off the ball in the movement on that. And so the lion's share of state giving in terms of money contributions was coming from corporations. And when you're at the state level, a $5,000 donation from AT&T can make or break your campaign. And so for us, it became very clear that, number one, we need to, to take a phrase, defund the anti-choice corporate political pipeline. Number two, we need to make abortion normalized for corporations to speak out about, and as a way to bust abortion stigma. And number three, if we can activate both workers, consumers, and investors, we can really, really help move the needle on taking funding away from anti-abortion politicians, and hopefully rerouting that and reinvesting that in the community, in healthcare services, in access to care overall. And so that's what launched our Repo Receipts campaign. It's a campaign that is built on like a huge universe of data that we gathered over a year of each and every political contribution a Fortune 250 made to politicians. And then we went through and we graded them anti-choice, anti-abortion, pro-abortion, and then, people who are kind of more in the middle. We launched that campaign formally last year, focusing on AT&T, Disney, Uber, Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble, and a few other companies. We picked these companies because they're companies that have moved on social issues before, who have a huge political giving footprint, but also who rely heavily on young consumers, who increasingly care a lot about how corporations actually act beyond their PR statements. And so our goal is to get money out of the anti-choice political system by getting corporations to stop giving to anti-choice politicians, making it a liability for corporations to give to these politicians. And we have had a lot of success. We got AT&T to move after the insurrection with the Sedition Caucus here in DC. And to note, these things are connected. Every single last one of the 147 members of Congress who voted to object to the certification of the 2020 presidential election results is anti-abortion. Every single one of those politicians is also opposed to the For the People Act and to all the ways in which we can actually help bolster our democracy. All those people are also people who have been opposed to defunding the police or even just basic police reform, right? These things are connected. And corporations have for too long tried to feign neutrality with their political giving by pretending that both parties are equal, and they are not equal. And you cannot simply say that we are giving for business reasons when your giving is empowering Representative X, who then gets into power in the Texas Texas legislature and passes laws like SB8 or SB1, which is the voter restriction law, and now is working to pass the anti-trans bill. All of these lawmakers are the same. They're all passing bills that both restrict our bodily autonomy, whether you are trying to seek out abortion, trying to seek out birth control, trying to undergo hormone treatment as a young person to live out the identity that is you. And they're also trying to restrict our political autonomy by restricting our access to the voting booth, because they see what Black women, Indigenous women, and women of color have done at the voting booth and organizing and building our power, and they're scared of that. These fights are linked, and corporations are funding the politicians who are working to bring about this extremist, fascist vision into the country. And you cannot talk about that without talking about abortion rights.
Thank you so much for that, Sonja. That was fantastic. And then it's funny how you mentioned Uber, because they got a lot of credit for putting out a statement after SB8 and how they're going to help their employees and things like that. But at the same time, they're involved in a lot of anti-worker and just, again, funding anti-politicians as well, too. And so are so many other companies also. I think recently, particularly a lot of them are moving towards Texas because it's a business-friendly state. But it's not friendly if you have a uterus, or if you're trans, or if you're a racial minority, or if, you want to vote, basically. You're a brown person who wants to vote. And I say this as a former Texas resident and a former Texas voter. It's just not. So you can't play both sides, essentially. I also loved how you mentioned how they're all connected. And that actually takes me to an article that was published earlier this week, an interview Lori gave with Rewire News about how so much of the anti-abortion movement is part of a larger campaign and right-wing movement to go after the 14th Amendment and just upend so many of our rights for LGBT rights, immigrant rights, gender and racial liberation, civil rights, and all these things. So Lori, can you tell us a bit more about how these all are connected to this larger movement to kind of gut the 14th Amendment and equal protection?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's a SCOTUS watcher, right? Even marginally, just marginally watches what the Supreme Court does, or even marginally pays attention to what the right wing is doing. But even if you don't, let me give you just a brief overview. I grew up as a fundamentalist Christian kid. Back in the 80s, there was this whole, we're going to stack the court. We're going to turn it, right wing, because we need, like serious constitutional fundamentalist minded people who believe in keeping the Constitution true to its original intent, right? People like Antonin Scalia, right, who had this the Constitution never changes. It's a you know the original intent is all that it means. And some of those people are very intent on getting rid of things that they feel like the founders would have never gone for. And one of those things is that they've said very expressly, especially when Trump was in office, is birthright citizenship, right? And that's one of the earliest Supreme Court rulings that evokes the 14th Amendment, Section 1, right? Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. So that's one the case that they really would love to get rid of. But when we fast forward, every case that we're talking about that deals with equal rights, equal protection under the law for gender, equal protection under the law as far as privacy, are all stacked on the 14th Amendment. And I'm not just talking about gender rights, and I'm not just talking about rights to marry who we want, including loving Virginia, and the one that makes it equal marriage legal. I'm sorry that I'm stumbling over my words today, but I'm also talking about the things the rulings that desegregated, and also the rulings that gave us the right to an attorney when we have to go, like when we're indigent. We're talking about the right to remain silent, right? All of those cases are under the 14th Amendment. And there are plenty of people who want all of that gone, right? They can't roll back to the 1950s and 40s that they would like to have without getting rid of our right to have birth control, the right for married people to have birth control, the right for people to go to school where they want to. All of that is legal because of the 14th Amendment. And there are very much people who would love to resegregate legally, to have their little Christian churches be able to be tax exempted again, and all of those things. And up until, oh goodness, I don't know why I can't say words today, but up until recently, Roe was their biggest target, right? Because once they can take out Roe, then they can dismantle other cases. Hope that made sense. I'm sorry that I've been so today.
No, it does, because like Sonja was talking again too, it's like it's not just abortion. They're also coming after all these anti-trans bills that we see coming through. Just so
nothing is a silo, right? Like nothing is a silo. And that's the thing is like, there's, Griswold, all these cases, Griswold, Loving v. Virginia, Gideon, right, which enables people to have public defenders. All of Miranda, there are plenty of people on the right who think Miranda was a reach. That you should not have the right to remain silent. You should not have Miranda rights. Like we're so used to it because, I'm only 43. All the propaganda shows that I grew up with, everybody got read. We all know the Miranda warning, right? Like all of us of a certain age cannot conceive of a world without a Miranda warning. So like, in order to repeal those things back, it would take a major, major cultural shift. But don't think that they're not trying. Like, who thought we would be here as far as Roe? I mean, when they were saying those things in my church as a kid, I used to snicker as a kid who loved politics because I was like, y'all not never gonna get what y'all think you gonna get. So,
Yeah, I think it's like, to your point, Lori,
but here we are.
The anti-abortion movement So I think we're having some tech issues because I can hear Lori, but I think she's on the backstage.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
While we figure that out. Oh, Lori's back. Okay.
Sorry. Mercury's in retrograde. We're just.
It really is. I saw the question. You want to read it, Mary?
Yeah, you can finish what you were saying then, or.
I don't even remember what I said now.
You were talking about how you made a good point. How the other side is a little better strategized.
Yeah, I'm like saying the other side, they play the long game, right? They're not playing for just a game, right? They're not playing for just when in the late 90s, when we thought Roe was going to fall the last time, right? They had the sense to look at the Casey decision and go, how can we use this to defeat abortion rights? They looked at the standard, right? The standard of like a burden, right? How far can we stretch that, right? We looked at it on our side and we went, Roe's still here, and packed up our stuff and went home. Pretty much everybody just sat back and was like, cool. We can't do that because they're playing the long game and they're playing the state level game, and overwhelmingly our forces had divested in the state level game, and we've got to put our money back in the grassroots.
I agree with you, Lori. And I think also too, and not to really call anyone out, but I think another issue too, and I'm sure you both can attest to this, is people who have organized in Repro for a while, a lot of the larger progressive organizations for a long time, haven't really picked up Repro either. A lot of them are doing it now, and it's really new, and we're great, we're happy for it. But a lot of times people just hadn't, because we were told that it was too controversial and divisive of an issue, and that we would actually lose people on our side from doing this. And it's like, and that has been a big detriment too. And so I think one of the things that a lot of folks can do as members, as donors of these larger multi-issue progressive orgs, is really tell them, you need to do more and stand up more for abortion rights. You know, like, this impacts every person with a uterus, whether the idea as woman, as non-binary, as trans, whichever they identify. It affects them. It affects their families. It affects everyone. And we need to do more about that. And I'm seeing a lot of groups that really hadn't said anything, but now are speaking up after SB 8 went into effect. And that's really great. But the problem is, though, it's already in effect. It's kind of almost too late in some respects, because, like, there are people who had their appointments canceled not to go out of state. Maybe they can't go out of state, have to take time off work. Their access is already taken away from them. And it's like, if we had maybe made a bigger fuss when it was going through the legislative process and the state level, we can still do that. And there is still time. In Florida, they've introduced a copycat bill to SB 8 as well. There's time to get on the ground in Florida and join the folks who are the Repro orgs down there, the abortion funds, who are already organizing against that, to stop it wherever gets to DeSantis' desk, because we know he's going to sign it. Here in my home state of Ohio, they've introduced an abortion trigger ban bill that would basically, they're hoping for Roe to be overturned next year. And when it does, they're going to immediately outlaw abortion here in Ohio. We had our protest on Tuesday against that. We went into the Capitol in the Rotunda. We actually went into the Senate session.
Amazing.
And then, thank you. And they had the first hearing of it already this week. So there's time to stop these bills. And I promise, even in very progressive states, there most likely are anti-abortion bills. I think I heard somewhere in New Hampshire, they've introduced an anti-abortion bill. A lot of people think that, oh, well, it's never going to pass here. But, like, you never know. It doesn't hurt to get in there and just let them know, this is completely unacceptable. We're not going to pass this here in this state. Like, I'm telling you, corporate money, it talks, especially in especially in the state house. It talks a lot. So to get in there and to just defeat it if you can, and make him know this is grossly unpopular. and these bills are really extreme. One thing that the exactly like Rachel said, they do. Blue states do have red pockets. I used to live in California. I was volunteering with the abortion fund out there, Access. A lot of access to reproductive justice. A lot of people think that because you're in California or New York and you have some pretty liberal abortion laws, things are really great. It's not. Accessing a clinic is still difficult. In California, the majority of the clinics are still in urban areas that are on the western part of the state. There really aren't any clinics on the whole eastern side. So if you live in a rural part of the state, you still need to travel several hours to get to the nearest clinic. That's an issue.
Also, we have for a long time ignored state politics. And
I'm sorry. I just want people to know, like,
is
just because you're comfortable in your space now doesn't mean that that stuff is not coming. And the other thing is we have to hold people on the left accountable for their anti-choice voting. Like, we did not get here just by the right wing voting for anti-choice legislation. Like, a lot of this legislation in state level, at the state level, like for parental notification and parental permission, for waiting periods, a lot of that stuff was voted for by Democrats. I'm just gonna say it, like it's the truth. And so, I mean, them's just facts, and those people need to be held accountable too. Like, we didn't just get here from the right.
Yeah, there's a couple things I want to know about that in particular. Number one, because we've taken our eye off the states, there are states that are nominally blue that have increasingly more extreme right-wing minorities that are becoming majorities because of gerrymandering, because of other voter restriction and democracy suppression issues. So let's take Wisconsin, a state that used to have a hugely robust public education system, strong unions, didn't have access to abortion issues, and then Scott Walker came, right? Let's look at Michigan. We have a Dem governor there, and yet look at the issues she has faced, including violence, because of Republican lawmakers who have threatened to overturn election results. So we cannot assume that blue means safe electorally, nor from a law standpoint, right? So we have to organize in the states. The midterms, it's not just about who holds power in DC. It is critical, absolutely critical, that we win back whole state governments, or it's gonna be a wash in 24 in so many bad ways when it comes to any number of our rights, because they're gonna pass laws to keep restricting voting access and abortion and trans rights and all kinds of other important rights for us. Second, one of the things that we are working on here in DC is getting the Women's Health Protection Act passed. The Women's Health Protection Act is it establishes a statutory requirement for abortion that allows for abortion providers to provide care and for people to receive care. So it gets rid of what we call trap laws, things that are targeted regulations against providers. So laws like how big a clinic's hallways have to be, what kind of unnecessary medications that are expensive that they need to have on hand. These are laws that get to your point, Lori and Mary, that were enacted after Casey to, again, test the boundaries of the court's willingness to allow undue burdens to be put into effect. What is an undue burden? Does it mean if a clinic closes down because they had to widen their hallways, is that an undue burden? These are the kind of strategic and smart laws the anti-abortion movement put into effect to test the KC standard, on top of other laws like 6-week bans or 15-week bans, things that attack viability, which attacks the Roe framework. So they're attacking both the viability framework in Roe, a lot of these laws we're seeing recently, and also the undue burden standard in Casey, and trying to figure out how does the court understand an undue burden, right? And so the Women's Health Protection Act helps to get rid of a lot of those kinds of restrictions and provides a federal protection, a federal right to abortion care, both to provide it and to receive it. And it historically passed the House 2 Fridays ago, which was a big, big moment for us in the movement to get this past the House with, I think, almost the entirety of the Democratic caucus support. And now we're in the Senate, which the Senate has become, unfortunately, the graveyard of progress, because they allow arcane procedures or processes like the filibuster to get in the way of progress. And what we've been saying is process should not get in the way of progress. We don't have quite the votes on the Democratic side for the Women's Health Protection Act. Yet we had to organize and do some work on people like Manchin and Casey. But that's an organizing problem that we can overcome. That's a power building problem. What we cannot overcome is a Senate that this literally cannot move legislation because they are so wedded to these processes, which have nothing to do with constitutional order and all about preserving certain minority rule that's actively inhibiting our ability to advance this country forward and to protect our democracy overall. So what we would encourage you to do is to make sure your lawmakers, especially those in the Senate, know that they need to pass the Women's Health Protection Act through any means necessary, ending the filibuster, whatever it takes. No process should get in the way of progress in protecting our rights. I really encourage folks to take action. We have a petition on our website. We just actually did a huge delivery of over 400,000 signatures to the Senate, demanding that they pass the Women's Health Protection Act. But this is the first step, right? We need to pass WIPA, end the filibuster, expand the court, because the court as it currently stands is not working anymore. It has been so jammed with far-right ideologues that they don't care about legitimacy. All they care about is getting their ideology further cemented, and we can't let that happen. And then thirdly, I think going back to your point, Laura, I wanted to kind of like plus this. The anti-abortion movement rose from the in direct response to desegregation. Like, you can literally draw the actors who attempted to stop desegregation straight through to the anti-abortion movement, including many white Christian evangelicals who originally did not give a shit about abortion. When the Roe decision first came down, the Civil Rights Convention spoke out in favor of abortion, but they were definitely not in favor of desegregation. And then that political calculus changed as they kind of began to coalesce around a strategy that if we can get abortion, if we can roll back abortion rights, that allows us a full open view, again, to what you were saying, Lori, to undercut so many rights, including, like you said, desegregation. So this is part of a larger far-right ideology and vision for the country that Roe is just one step, but not the last step for.
Thank you all. Go ahead.
Can I just follow that up with, I'm paraphrasing, but there's a quote from Jerry Falwell where he says that when they were looking for an issue to come up with instead of the Bob Jones University segregation case, which nobody cared about, okay, like nobody was interested in being publicly known as a racist against interracial dating, because Bob Jones University had a rule against interracial dating and they lost their 501c3 status under the Carter administration. And, you know, like Christian evangelicals lost their minds. And so they were like looking for another issue. And Jerry Falwell said, we needed a simple issue because evangelicals are simple people. And so we decided on abortion because it's a black and white issue and it was simple. And that's why we chose it.
Let's point the hypocrisy too, because these lawmakers, they're not against abortion when their mistresses end up pregnant, as we've seen.
Or their daughters. Or their daughters. Don't get me started on how many times I have funded members of the fundamentalist churches who have literally said to me they're going to go to one of those like shaming, release the secret groups after they get their abortion, because their abortion is different than everybody else's abortion. And can I also just address this statement that's in the comments? Mm-hmm. So Carmen Bello said, undocumented persons seeking abortions in Texas are doubly hurt because of Abbott's attacks upon immigrants. Yes, that absolutely. Like one of our staff members and in Yellowhammer Fund, Denny, lives in the Rio Grande Valley. One of the other things that we know is a big barrier for access is the border patrols, like especially down in the valley. Like you can't just leave the Rio Grande Valley. Like it's not like you can just go freely without having to deal with checkpoints, right? And it's the same thing in Mississippi. This is what people don't understand. So Mississippi and Alabama, and a lot of southern states, like the highway patrol and local sheriff's departments, they'll just set up roadblocks and they'll just stop people and ask them for their IDs and stuff. And so that's the same thing for immigrant communities that are like working at chicken plants and stuff like that. A lot of them are very much confined to like a 40-mile radius where they can't really leave outside of their communities.
Yeah, and also to that point, I used to live in Texas, and I was actually in McAllen, and I was driving back towards Austin. So like, if you can get into the clinic in McAllen, the closest one is in San Antonio. Mm-hmm. To get to San Antonio, you have to drive through an internal state, because McAllen is in state of Texas, in the U.S. You have to drive through an internal border patrol checkpoint, a U.S. federal checkpoint.
Yep.
I didn't realize that until a friend and I were driving through it, and we were like, what is this? And they can search your car without a warrant because it's considered a constitution-free zone. Yep. They can ask you for your ID, for all of these things. Actually, they searched their car, they searched the truck and everything. And we were freaking out because my friend was non-conforming at the time, and, you know, they were white and I'm black. And so like, for some people, that's an odd coupling to be together in a car and at night. And they're like, so where were you going? What were you doing? Where are you at McAllen? What were you doing? And I'm like, can we just go? But no, and they stop people all the time. Plus, Border Patrol and the Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, just drives around all the time. Like, there are people who have multiple routes to get to the doctor or get to anywhere because they can just stop you. And in some cases, they'll just flag over Border Patrol and hand you right over.
Yeah, in Mississippi,
a literal police state.
Yeah, in Mississippi, ICE is known to just post up in neighborhoods, like in black SUVs, like after they do raids, they'll just like post up in neighborhoods to let people know they're surveilling them. They're not doing anything. They're just instilling fear.
Which I think is another part of this that's not talked about enough, is that the more abortion
so that's what I've learned
the more the police inherently get involved, right? Because the more restrictions you have, the more surveillance that is required, who does surveillance in this country? The police state, and the violence that therefore logically follows from that, right? If you have an abortion past 6 weeks in Texas, right now, there's no consequences, right, for the person who has the abortion. It's the provider, it's the Uber driver, it's the other folks who help you, which is very insidious in terms of how it breaks down by intention bonds and community. But the natural step to this kind of abortion law is criminalizing the person who has an abortion past whatever arbitrary restriction they put into effect next, right? So what does that mean? It means that any miscarriage becomes under suspicion. It means that any action that pregnant person does that may or may not have contributed to a miscarriage becomes under suspicion, right? It means constant surveillance over the physical bodies and actions of pregnant people. And we see this happening now. This is already happening in this country, but it will only increase. And we see what happens in other countries when they have extreme abortion bans in place or complete prohibition of abortion, where people are literally in prison for having miscarriages. Yeah. So the connection between ICE enforcement, between police state overall and abortion access cannot be denied, because when you have abortion restrictions, it increases surveillance in our lives, which hurts Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities especially, who already face so much violence in our communities. I grew up in Arizona. I am Black, but there people thought I was, Latinx. And I can't tell you how many times I was pulled over when I was a teenager because I might be undocumented because I looked the type, right? So like, imagine if you're someone who needs to get abortion care and you have to go through these different checkpoints and stuff. Checkpoints are not just something you see in apartheid Israel. It's something that's happening here, and they learn a lot of these strategies from us, right? So cycles of oppression, they learn from each other and they build upon each other, whether it's here in the US or abroad. And we need to make sure that we disrupt that by fighting against these restrictions, these bans on abortion, because that's just one more way the state comes into your life and enacts violence.
Exactly. And it's also important to know, I want to bring up too, as we all know, majority of people who have abortions already have at least one child. So if someone, has a miscarriage or has, and this has happened before too, like even in Mississippi, there was, I think a couple years ago, a woman who was going to do a home birth, which is totally fine, totally legal. And considering, lack of access to just any kind of medical care in Mississippi, it's like, come on now. There was a stillbirth.
That's Letice Fisher's case.
Yes.
Yeah, we worked on that case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We talk about it more, Lori, but also
yeah, like she actually didn't even know how far along she was. She went into labor in the middle of the night. They suspected she used misoprostol. That was their real big issue, is they suspected that she, caused her own abortion, and the fetus was later term. And when they came in to the EMS came in, like, she was bleeding heavily. I'm just not trying to be graphic. Instead of helping her, they just were like, "Oh, what has she done?" And like essentially like started criminalizing her from the beginning. To me, that's concerning. That's your first thought when you see someone laying on the floor bleeding and their fetus is in the toilet. You think that they drowned them, that something, you know what I mean? Your immediate thought is that they did something criminal, not, oh, what happened here? Let us find out. It was immediately criminalizing her. And the thing is I know that she's not the only person that gave birth into a toilet. It happens in hospitals all the time. I'm a doula. I'm training to be a midwife. Like, it's not abnormal. Women tend to go sit on toilets when they're in labor. I'm not trying to be graphic and gross, but it's just true. And so, like, it's not abnormal for that to happen. And it's not abnormal if you do it at home for you not to be able to grab a slippery, it's not abnormal. And part of the reason her case got dismissed, this is what I want to stress this, not as a hype up our organization thing, but as the power of activism and the power of knowing your stuff. Like, we actually told the DA why his case was flawed, and it was on that flaw that it got dismissed, because they were going to use the lung float test, which is not scientifically sound. And I told him flat out it was not scientifically sound, and they were going to hang their case on that being the proof that there was breath taken, blah, blah, blah. But Letitia's doing fine now. Letitia's been out of jail for quite a while. But when I tell you she sat in jail for 2 months while we had to raise her bail and get her out, and it was very traumatic for her. And she's now in school, and her kids are doing great because she was already mother of 3. And I think what's worse than her case is the case, like there was another case in Mississippi in the same county, where they locked up a young woman for years just because they assumed that supposedly she had used crack cocaine at some point during her pregnancy, and they assumed that that's why she had a stillbirth, even though there was no crack cocaine in the fetus, and therefore she needed to go to prison for second-degree murder.
That's absolutely terrible. And it's just, and in the meantime, what happens to the children they already have who are here? What happens to their families that are here, their communities of support? What happens to them? Like,
if they don't have strong support, like that's one of the things that we immediately put in place for Letice, was like getting people together to support her husband, to make sure that he was good, to make sure her kids were good, making sure that she was good in jail, making sure she had everything she could have, like every Black hair care product we could send sis, like literally all the money we could put on her books, like for real. And yeah, we were just making sure that she was good. And like if you don't have strong support, your kids are going to foster care. And that's the thing I need people to understand too, is like when we're looking at what we can do for abortion access, you can go talk to your prosecuting attorney and find out if they plan on prosecuting people for self-managed abortion, and you can ask them not to, honestly. And you can do that. Like, you and your friends can organize to do that. Like, use your connections to do that. Please, because they have the power to just not do that.
Thank you so much. I would love to hear y'all talk all afternoon, but unfortunately we do have to end soon. The next session begins at 1:00. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Sonja. For anyone watching, if you want to find out how you can be involved, I would absolutely suggest checking out weareultraviolet.org, the National Network of Abortion Funds. Their website is abortionfunds.org. You can find your local fund. There's one for every state. Get involved at the grassroots level because they absolutely need your help. Yellow Hammer Fund is really fantastic. You can find all those orgs online as well. Definitely get involved at the local level. Talk to your county prosecutor, your local prosecutors, and also see if they can agree that, if there are anti-abortion laws in your state, if they can agree, they won't prosecute. Recently, a lot of prosecutors have said they will not prosecute anti-abortion legislation. The Democratic Attorney General Association has said that we will not endorse candidates who are going to enforce these anti-abortion laws. There's a lot of prosecutorial discretion they have. That's a great place to start. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Nuban, for having us. Thank you for our engaged audience. We really appreciate it. And again, this is a long fight. Strap in. There's so many places you can plug in, I promise you.
So much work.
A lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Move On.
Thank you all.
Sorry about that, y'all. Apparently, I was muted the entire time, but we do have sessions that are starting right now. Digital Organizing 101 and Taking Action starts at 1. And then at 2, you have Learn Your Platform, Use Your Voice, How to Plan Your Next Demonstration, and Self-Care During Hectic Campaign Seasons. We also want to do an announcement. Go and join the photo booth. If you're looking at the screen, it's right across the top. You click. It's just to the right of the FAQ. Click the photo booth. You can take a photo and share it with your social media. And then our final session today to close out this session at 3:15 Eastern, 2:15 Central, and so on and so on. Biden won. Now what? That's going to be an electrifying session. See you then.